Welcome to all you storm watchers, storm chasers, and Leanierologists out there. Welcome to another edition of Tempest Talks. By way of introduction today, my friend Duffy Randolph is here. He is an experienced aerospace professional with over 30 years of leadership experience. He's also a walking encyclopedia, as we used to call him, and has one of the greatest senses of humor and best experience I have come across in my career. He has been my boss, my mentor, and personal friend for several years, and will always be someone with whom I consult in the future. Thank you so much for joining with us today, Duffy. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for inviting me.
You are most welcome. So, is there anything that I missed by way of introduction?
No, I mean, I've been in aerospace for well north of 30 years, and electronics for a little bit before that. Been through a Six Sigma transformation in the electronics world early on, and then through the lean transformation at Roar in the 90s. So it's been in the early 2000s. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. I'm very interested in that whole transition in the early 90s, because I know it was a big transformation and involved everybody, all hands on deck. So that'll be a really good discussion to have. By way of that, how has your knowledge and usage of lean tools helped you problem solve?
Well, I think the main points of lean problem solving is focusing on the process and not the person. And having the culture that supports that, is very, very important. But also dealing with documenting reality for lean problem solving, not peppering things with opinions, but actually just writing down what are the facts, and then that helps you frame potential solutions.
Yeah, in your experience, especially with the heavier transition in the early 90s, when folks didn't have that lean tool knowledge, did you see a difference in their acceptance?
There were some people that didn't accept things anyway. And unfortunately, during that transformation, you have to deal with that. I was not in a position at that point in my career to really be the one that had to deal with it, but they were dealt with. Yes. But then, the knowledge definitely does help. And in general, if there is enough organizational alignment that people are really pulling in the right direction together, the implementation goes a lot easier. And then the tools usually are pretty simple, and training people isn't that difficult. Yeah,
true.
So if you, as you know, there's kind of two approaches to lean. There's the approach that Roar took, which was time-based. Mm-hmm. And then there's a quality-based version of lean that other companies have embraced. And they both have their pluses and minuses. But the primary advantage of time-based lean manufacturing is that everyone can understand, what a second is or what an hour is. Where some of the quality-based tools are a little more arcane. And so if you want to get shop floor people involved, the time-based portion is effective. And also, when you focus on time, you can get to quality improvements because the waste shows up and the variation and that sort of thing. But on the quality side, there's some of the tools in the quality tool set, designed experiments and others, that you won't get to solely if you focus on time.
Yeah, that's so true. It's almost like what we used to talk about, kind of like the 80-20 rule, right? So the 80-20 rule can be applied in many different ways. It can be applied towards what processes need to be gone after. It can also apply towards what quality projects and stuff like that. But would you agree then the more quality-based lean things is more of like a specialized kind of focus rather than the time-based then?
Yeah, it definitely is. In fact, the statistically designed experiments can be very complex, and interpreting the results can be even worse, sometimes.
Yes, it's so
But
true.
but there are other tools that are some of the Taguchi tools. I don't know if you've seen those before, but pre-control charts and all those that have a significant statistical basis, but they're very simple to implement in a shop floor environment.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, you have to pick the right tool for the job and what the audience is willing to accept and understand. Yeah. When Boeing was implementing their advanced quality system the first time, the initial version before it became widespread, Roar participated with Boeing, and I was part of the team that supported that piloting. And the original approach, which they ultimately abandoned, was essentially, looking back on it now, it was a time-based lean manufacturing approach. They wanted us to go into the shop and document in excruciating detail every step of a process to see if we could see where variation was coming into it. And along with some designed experiments that we did with Boeing, we worked on a specific quality problem that we had on the 757 airplane. That's in one of the pictures behind me.
Yeah.
And we solved the problem, but ultimately Boeing decided that that what they were asking to do, they thought was too burdensome for their suppliers.
Interesting.
And so they went more down the path of the quality tools focus because they thought it could be done by a smaller group of professionals, and that the other side of all of the process observations and identifying improvements was too much to handle, really. And the ironic part is that Roar ended up picking that up in the 2000s.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So
it wasn't, what they were pursuing was not as clear cut as what we learned, cycle time equals takt time and discreetly identifying waste. But they were heading in that direction. I think if they had pursued it, they might have gotten there.
That's fascinating because in a lot of ways, Roar, of course, was an industry leader in terms of lean implementation, if not the best in the world. And it was, of course, a sub-tier supplier to the big airframers. I wonder if Boeing decided to go down the original time path, time observation, time studies, whatever you want to call it, path, if they actually would have been the industry leader for the implementation.
They could well have been.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I've seen in my time frame, my short time on the earth, if you will, I've seen the folks that kind of implement it from a quality type perspective.
Yeah.
A lot of times those implementations end up failing because they focus so much on the statistics or the data, and they lose sight of the quote unquote common person that's working in the actual shop itself, right? One of the biggest things that I remember from the Roar transition was this whole aspect of culture and culture change along with it. Did that happen? Did the culture change start before the lean transformation, or was it kind of hand in hand? How did that work?
That's a very interesting point. And I didn't appreciate the culture aspect of it until much later in the lean journey. The culture, what we call the positive employee philosophy, started in Foley, Alabama, in that plant in the late 80s, or mid to late 80s. And that culture, which still exists today, I mean, it hasn't, some of the names have changed of what we call it, but all the elements are the same. Those elements created an environment that would allow lean to flourish because it's open to a communication, adult to adult behavior, all those elements. And it wasn't until after lean was really well underway, at least personally, it dawned on me that you cannot do lean without some sort of open culture.
Yeah. And open, what do you mean by open?
Well, in other words, people are free to speak their mind, get issues out on the table, work together to resolve them. It's kind of like, if you go back in time to like the Deming, the 14 points and the quality circles, one of the reasons the quality circles kind of fizzled is that they weren't empowered to do anything.
Oh, right. Yeah.
In many cases, they weren't empowered. They didn't have the foundation that they needed to succeed.
Yeah, it was all about badge level and title, right?
At least in the US. And then if you go over to Japan, they were much more successful. And at the time when I was, still working for Burroughs before Roar, that was seen as, it was a product of the cultural homogeneity of the Japanese, and that we couldn't reproduce that in America because we're all, cowboys and everything else.
Individualistic, as they call it.
But I think they missed, that they'd oversimplified the situation. It really had to do more with company culture than a nation's culture.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the main point of Leanbrella, because it dawned on me when I was working with you, it dawned on me the importance of the culture aspect as well. And so one of the main points of Leanbrella is this concept called culture climate. And from my point of view, my personal point of view, is they cannot learn any of the lean tools until they've been through culture climate, because of that aspect. And because I discovered that it wasn't just the tools and the knowledge of the lean tool that helped the implementation actually survive. It was that whole concept of the culture journey as well, right? So they did have to go hand in hand. So I find it interesting that the culture change actually started before the lean transformation.
It really started about 10 years before.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the team was already feeling more like, more empowered, like you mentioned before, more like their voices could be heard, which, because of that, do you think that helped with the employees being involved in problem solving as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That coupled with the burning platform, the need for change, right? Particularly for the Southern California sites. Again, positive employee philosophy for us started in Alabama and migrated west into the other sites. And Riverside, the two kind of went hand in hand as far as we had to implement lean, and I think you'll be talking to Martin.
Yes.
And so the burning platform of the survival of the business was a uniting front as well. And so perhaps, it's hard to separate the two.
Yeah, it's almost like there needed to be a reason to even implement a lean transition, but before you could have the lean transition, there needed to be a recognition that the culture needed to change and be receptive for any form of acceptance of that kind of program.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's kind of like the perfect storm, if you will, right?
It was.
Yeah. So it's like you can't have one without the other. And it's not really chicken before the egg kind of discussion, right? It's like, regardless, you got to have it. Yeah, interesting. Have you recognized that because of what you learned specifically during that big transition, right? Because it was really big, where you've actually learned and the lean tools and have applied it at home? Have you had that experience?
Well, I think everyone who gets into the lean tools, sooner or later 5S creeps in to their personal lives. Although I refuse to label my stapler. I am not going
Yeah, it's kind of like that draws the line.
done with it. Not going to do it. Yeah, and of course, I do, a lot of my hobbies are, cooking, and, I've done some brewing and curing meats and all that. And a lot of that's all process focused, right?
Yeah,
It's
true.
Yeah, it's time, temperature, ingredients, heat, all that stuff that are process development, lean process elements.
Yeah, it's all about the process. And a lot of people forget that it's all about the process as well.
Right.
That was one of the other things that I've recognized, of the difference between Six Sigma and a lean, or a lean Six Sigma. Because a lot of companies, I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, have been really, really big on, no, it needs to be lean Six Sigma. But Roar really Roar and Goodrich put the emphasis on the lean portion of it. And then the Six Sigma stuff was a supporting function to the main lean program.
And it actually was, to a much lesser extent. And that's one of the things that later on we started bringing in more of some of the advanced tools back into what we were doing. Things, some designed experiments can be very powerful in some of the, composite manufacturing and other things. And understanding that there's some of the statistical tools that don't require you to go make 50 of something or 35 of something, and then stand back and in a month get back with the results and see what happened. I mean,
Right.
So the Taguchi tools, the pre-control charts and that sort of thing that you can implement quickly, we did quite well.
Yeah, all of that stuff was, it was in essence kind of an introduction for some of the support staff in what a metric is, because not many of them thought about metrics in that way before, right?
Well, yeah, and the difference, and that's still unique, is the identification of a driver measure versus a results measure, right?
Yeah.
And so what is the thing that an operator can see and do that affects, 99.9% quality, 100% on-time delivery, it's time, it's, all those things that they can do to drive that result that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of like, in the past, 70s, early 80s, 60s, even 50s, it was all about volume. I've got to make tons and tons and tons and tons and tons, because that's the only way I'm going to meet demand, is just volume, volume, volume. Then, of course, Deming introduced a lot of more control methods, to understand, okay, I've got a ton of volume coming in. Now, how do I manage that volume so that it's perfect every time it comes off the line? And then, of course, the Japanese perfected it in terms of one-piece flow and that kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Roar wasn't any different in that mindset.
Yeah, no, it was, prior to my arrival in Roar, it was very much a mass production operation in aerospace. I mean, not mass production like automotive, because aircraft never make that many, but it was batch focused, process villages everywhere, transporting parts, miles and miles and miles from one operation to the next, and getting them out the door and losing them on the way. But that's sort of things that happen. So, it was that portion, particularly in fabrication and to a lesser extent in bond, was massive.
Yeah. So being a leader in the system of something going from that kind of massive volume, if you will, down to this concept of one-piece flow, how did you use the training of the tools, or even convince your team to trust the fact that, no, it needs to be one-piece flow, it shouldn't be this big bulk mass? How did you get your teams to buy in?
Well, we had a fairly strong sensei that was an outside consultant. And he was very direct, to put it mildly, in the approach that we were going to use. And, and he had the respect of the people in the shop,
Yeah.
and once you start to see results, and that were linked to employee compensation, because we also had gain share,
right.
That was a results payout bonus for all employees. Once that started to happen, you get buy-in.
Interesting. And him being, so do you think it makes a difference of the type of facilitator, so the type of lean sensei for the industry, or do you think it's your sensei needs to be a certain way to get you over the hump?
I think it probably depends on what the industry is. Is it a manufacturing? Is it a what I'll call it a Rust Belt manufacturing operation? Is it a pure office or engineering environment? Is it a combination? I think it depends.
Yeah.
In this case, we're in the early days. We were purely manufacturing focused until later on.
Yeah, instead of R&D or new program kind of concept.
Yeah, I mean, we
coming in.
did. I guess it would have been around 2000 is when the office environment really started to come into that.
Oh, okay.
And
So
to
it
a
was
less,
heavily.
it was really gradual.
Oh, okay. So that's several years of focusing manufacturing first and then getting the support teams.
Then transitioning in, the timing is kind of soft. It depends on the organization as to how they embrace things.
Interesting. Did the team, when the lean transformation was happening, was it being driven mostly through the quality organization first, or was it mostly this sensei saying the manufacturing team just needs to get on board and quality is part of the manufacturing?
Yeah, it was operations driven.
Okay, so it was definitely ops driven. Okay, interesting. Did you see a difference in the team's performance since they grasped the concept of the lean methodology? Like what things worked and what things didn't work so well once lean was rolled out, if you will?
Well, I mean, time-based standard work is just the biggest piece of it in operations. In the design and development side, we developed, we made some of our own tools for lean product development that dealt with risk management, process management, process development that were extremely powerful. Again, when you have the right team environment.
Yeah, which makes sense because I think a lot of people are trying to, crack that code, if you will. Like, how do you get time-based things on the support side? Like, how do you do that? Recently, I was doing time observations, watching engineers design, and I wanted to rip my hair out because it's a creative process, and so it's really hard to do time observations to that kind of thing because an engineer will click and then sit back and think.
Right.
You can't really.
Yeah, you can't just say
that.
Thinking was 25% waste.
Right. So it's like in a support function, like in engineering design, like in the support teams, like supply chain, that kind of stuff, some of these time-based tools may not apply so well. So how would you recommend, or what tools would you recommend they use rather than, time observations, just basic time observations?
Well, I mean, a lot of the things that we do with product development teams would be, a daily stand-up review. And some sort of measure of progress, whether it's a schedule or whatever for that wherever phase they are, whether it's whether it's a preliminary design phase or at the point where you're engineering, doing engineering releases, having that stand-up review for accountability has been pretty strong.
Yeah, because a lot of teams, especially this team that I was working with, they're struggling with this concept of how do I handle time in a creative environment. And so one of the tools that we've been using a lot for good, bad, or indifferent has been process mapping, and just getting general times associated with process mapping, because then they're thinking about the steps that it goes in, because a standard work combination sheet probably wouldn't work very well in that kind of environment.
No, the best thing you can do, I think, is work on a process map where they organize their creative process, into at first probably larger chunks.
Yeah.
And then refine it as you go.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're not going to get down to the seconds, I don't think, or at least I don't know anyone who has,
I would think a computer would be needed at that point in time.
And the other thing that we've done for product development has been, the Obeya concept that Toyota developed.
Yeah.
And it's not as easy when you're making aircraft parts, because it's hard to park the thing in the middle of a conference room, the object that you're working on.
Yeah.
But I visited Toyota facilities where they, are working on minivan or whatever, and they'll have the car, or at least the mock-up of the car, in the room or in the room next door. And there's no replacement for seeing things physically.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, a lot of teams struggle with that, right? Design for manufacture, for instance, is a huge issue.
Right. And we've done some level of physical mock-ups for early product builds and all that. But of course, that when I was involved with that was pretty much before all the 3D printing and stuff became much more readily available, and probably make it a whole lot easier now, at least for smaller stuff.
Yeah. I remember making a lot of things out of cardboard for the 3P process, which a lot of hospitals are actually using now. They're building, pharmacies out of cardboard and seeing if there's enough space for carts and stuff to make their way through. With something as big as an aircraft, it can be done, but do you have a warehouse big enough for it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of digital simulation tools that are really just starting to scratch the surface on. Yeah. And then, of course, VR, I think, will come around to be used. Wow.
I hadn't thought about VR before. That's a really good point. We've learned a lot, this last year. There's been hundreds of podcasts and video blogs and articles in the Harvard Business Review and so forth, all about COVID and what's happening with COVID. Because really the way we do business is different. And one of the things that that was brought up with COVID was VR, going back to VR. If we can't get back together, well, then we're going to put VR headsets on and have our meetings as if we're in the same room together. Yeah. There's benefits to that. But
it's still not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. I would agree. But how do you think concepts are thinking outside of the box, like VR, right? But in terms of the lean tools, how do you think the lean tools have supported teams dealing with complex, uncontrollable acts of God kind of problems? Does it help or does it hurt them?
I think it helps. I mean, part of it is, I'm not working in the factories these days. But we did go through, obviously with COVID, it was, employee safety was number one. Mm-hmm. And coming up with ways to make the workstation such that people weren't, working on top of each other on a piece of product.
Oh, yeah.
Physical barriers, separating, because we had standard work for all the operations, and unfortunately, the bottom fell out of the commercial airplane market at the same time. We had to rewrite standard work anyway because the rates were changing.
Right.
But we were able to take advantage of being able to space out the operations, yet physically distance the operators. And we wouldn't have been able to do that, I don't think, easily or effectively. It wasn't easy, but it was effective because we had the time-based standard work.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before either. Most of what I've heard is the system was just incapable of handling it. So companies that didn't have the infrastructure, be it the network or whatever, VPNs or whatever, to handle their entire workforce going from in person to not on site overnight was difficult. But I didn't even think about like social distancing in a manufacturing setting, of course, because like distance is waste, right?
Right.
So having 6 feet apart adds seconds. And in the manufacturing world, that can add up to being a lot.
It can, but those, there's seconds you need to take in the circumstances, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and with the rate changes, of course, it changes the tack time for that too. So that makes sense. But I hadn't thought about that before, that the standard worksheet, of course, like how things flow through the form or through the building, a standard worksheet would be really important during times like this.
Right. And what operations can you split amongst operators and that sort of thing?
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that aspect before. One of the teams that I was talking to recently, they had that systems problem where originally IT was controlling laptops, and because laptops are expensive, right? So they were controlling laptops and they were controlling VPNs, and not everybody had a VPN. You had to be a certain badge level to be a VPN. And so all of a sudden, here's an entire workforce of 400 people or whatnot that need to work from home, but can't access the network.
Yeah. We had a short-lived problem with that. I mean, for the company, it was a big transition, and it happened very fast. I got to think back. It was under control within a week, I would say.
That's awesome.
And largely remedied a couple of weeks. I mean, we had to increase the number of triple the amount of VPN capacity, if not more, to what we had. Because again, you had a small fraction of people working remotely sometimes versus, almost every salaried staff that wasn't involved in supporting product manufacture was offsite. You've gone from one extreme to another.
Yeah. From a personal perspective, what kinds of things do you do different, COVID or whatnot, based off of what you've learned with the lean tools? Is there anything you've done differently?
Well, I still use the old to-do list method for keeping track of things. I mean, it's basic stuff like that, and process mapping comes in all the time. Yeah. And trying to understand a process, to break it down. So, okay, how long is this step going to take? Okay, how long is this step going to take?
Yeah, especially like renovating a house. How long is that going to take?
A long time. That's the answer.
Yeah. What are my theory of constraints, right? What are my constraints that are going to impact that process?
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. My husband and I, when we first got married, we had differing priorities. Well, businesses have different priorities as well, right? Well, me being the lean person that I am, we mapped it. We mapped what our different priorities were so that we could see what priorities were now our family priorities versus our priorities, from personal interest perspective. So For those of you listening, it does happen. Believe it or not. I have Postits at the ready. I love Postits for that reason. Is there anything like that? Because I know that your spouse is a lean person as well, very, very lean person. Have you seen that happen between the two of you?
Not to that extent. No, I mean,
It could be.
Our garage is still at 5S level 1, so we're working through that.
Yeah. Oh man, I haven't gone to that extent on the poor man, but there is an evacuation plan should we ever need one. Like I know where all the stuff to evacuate, that kind of stuff. I know where all that is. It's mapped out and it's in a specific place. But that probably says more about my color than anyone else's color.
Yeah, probably.
Hint for those that are wanting to do culture climate and go through real colors. That could be a hint of what my color is. But how have you seen a difference with your teams then with COVID? Like, how have you been able to lead your team during these unprecedented times? And have you used any lean tools to achieve those things?
Well, really, first and foremost, it probably is the virtual daily stand-up. I do have a daily tag up with my directs, half hour every day, or up to a half hour every day. Usually it's just 10 minutes or so. But the things that you would typically do, in person in the morning, walk around, say hi, what's up for the day, nothing too formal, but just to keep tabs on what the individual may have going on or any issues they may have. That sort of thing. It's not a big deal, and it's certainly not complicated, but everyone seems to find it beneficial. And so both for myself and my team, and then each one of my peers and their teams do a very similar thing.
That's interesting. That's good. Because I know some people, speaking of colors, right? Some people are missing that human connection. So back to culture. Some people prefer having that human connection in the day-to-day. And so they've been struggling in this virtual environment. Do you have anybody like that on your team, or have you had somebody like that on your teams in the past?
Not at this point. I think the people who are working for me right now are fairly experienced, and I don't think it's not a problem in my group, but I could see, especially with newer career employees, younger folks, that it could be an issue. I think it's also an issue if this were to drag out for career progression. For the young up and comers that may not, as far as getting visibility. I think one of the things that I miss mostly is just some of the random hallway conversations where you learn about things that are going on that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise do. And now it's, everything's a half-hour Zoom meeting or something,
Yeah, that's interesting. So 2 questions coming from that. The first one is, how long do you think a meeting needs to be? Because I know a lot of people are suffering from Zoom burnout.
Yeah.
How long do you think a meeting needs to be effective, even in a virtual environment?
Well, of course, it depends on what it is, but generally, you shouldn't have anything much more, certainly not more than an hour, and I try and keep things to 30 minutes. The only reason that I tend to schedule things for an hour is because depending on who's participating or who you need to participate, they may not show up on time. And so if you schedule a half-hour meeting that starts 30 minutes or 15 or 20 minutes late, it's not really going to help.
Right. It's not really effective, right?
Right.
So do you still use an agenda in those meetings then too, to kind of keep it structured?
Yeah.
Interesting. Because to your previous point, I hadn't thought about this before, but those new hires that are fresh out of college or whatnot, that would normally have an experience like I had when I first started. I would be thrown into an executive meeting where I'd be introduced to those folks. I may not say anything or contribute to it, but at least I'm in that meeting. Not much of that is happening right now.
No, I don't think so, or at least not. It's not happening as formally, or at least as in an organized fashion as it was.
Interesting. So when we actually do get to come back together, is there a plan for getting those folks, up to speed? Because most of them haven't had the opportunity to work in the work environment, right? So it's almost like their onboarding has been delayed.
Well, to a certain extent. Now, we haven't been, obviously with the industry situation in aerospace, we haven't been onboarding much of anybody.
Oh, right.
In the last year. If it were to become a protracted thing, then I think it'd be more of an issue. And also, what's unclear to us right now, and the leadership team is working with various groups to figure out what is the long-term vision of how we're going to work. Will there be a sustain? I think a lot of people learned a lot about our ability to perform remotely. That there was a lot of naysayers about remote work in general. So I think a lot of I think there's consensus now that you can be effective remotely, at least in some capacities and at least for some roles. And so we're sorting out what roles can be fully remote, what roles, are going to be some combination, and what roles, really need to be on site. And then how do we manage it between the roles, and there's different things that, we have to sort out about how we're going to collaborate, because if you're going to have a mixture of remote, on-site, the conference rooms have to be able to accommodate that effectively. It's not just, one phone in the middle of a large room. And,
right.
And so that we have folks working on that. We'll see where it goes. I think it'll be a good outcome. It's just there's some technical hurdles that have to get sorted through.
Yeah, and I'd imagine, of course, all of those things, all of that planning and so forth would be using some form of lean tool in one way or another. Either mapping it out on a systems type profile or mapping it out physically. I bet.
Yeah, and some physical experimentation with the rooms and that sort of thing as to what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think you'll have a problem with people wanting to come back in person?
I think you're going to have both. I think you have people that are itching to get back to a regular work environment, and there's those that don't want to come back.
Yeah,
I'm sure, and there's those of us that are in between.
Yeah.
Because there's some days that, for my personal, if I'm going to be on Zoom calls for 8, 9, 10, 11 hours, doesn't matter whether I'm in my
office doing it
or sitting here doing it, it's all about the same.
Right.
But if there's going to be a higher level of interaction and, process mapping, creative exercises, there are electronic tools to support that, but it's still not the same.
Yeah, there's something about holding a packet of Post-it notes.
Well, not so much for me, but
especially for us lean professionals, we're like, get me back into the conference room doing butcher paper on the wall and Post-it notes in my hand. There's just something different about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, because from a personal standpoint, there's many organizations, that I'm involved in. Brigham Young University, I'm on the Industrial Advisory Board, and other organizations, charitable organizations and whatnot, that are all concerned about what's going to happen when we open up, because are people going to want to leave their house? is a big deal. especially cost of living and other factors as well.
Right.
But engineering students, what's your take on engineering students entering the workforce where the last year was their junior year and this year is their senior year? So they're looking for work. Do you think they're at a disadvantage because they haven't had in-class, labs and stuff? Or do you think they'll be okay?
No, I definitely, I mean, my son's an engineering student.
Huh,
And now, fortunately, he's early in that journey. But again, the labs aren't labs.
Yeah.
It's just not the same.
Yeah, because usually for the summer we'd be getting lots of interns in most of these big companies, and that's not happening.
Yeah, you're not going to have a virtual intern. That doesn't make a lot of. I mean, it'd be very difficult to do.
Right. Where it's like, here's widget XYZ. Go redesign it because it needs to be ABC now. They're going to have a hard time conceptualizing it because they've never seen the part in person.
Yeah.
So hiring may be very different too in the future once we're back in person.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen is because everyone now has their own Zoom account pretty much around the world, or
True.
WebEx or whatever the tool is, that I think there'll be a lot more interviews, at least on a preliminary basis, conducted over video rather than face to face. Save some travel expense. Yeah, unless you're really sure that that's you've gone through another process, because it started before COVID for us as far as doing some video interviews, but I think now that it's become more commonplace that pretty much everyone's equipped now to deal with it. It'll be much
it makes
more.
it a little easier, right?
It's certainly more accepted, let's put it that way. In the past, if you go back 3 years and someone sent you a Zoom meeting notice, you go,
like, what am I doing with this? I don't want to be on camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts for those students maybe that are coming out of engineering and going into or searching for a job? And then maybe for those leaders that are either hiring those folks or dealing with all of this fun stuff of lean transition, or even dealing with the acts of God kind of things?
That's a big question. I'm not sure.
I know, it's huge. But you can handle it.
Yeah. I think from a implementation, talk about coming out of college and going into an organization that's implementing lean or is a lean organization. It's take the time, breathe deep, and then try to understand what they're telling you and what the tools are, because I think a lot of highly technical engineers look at the lean tools and dismiss them out of hand as just being overly simplistic.
Oh my goodness, yes. My husband's one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they can be simplistic, but they can also be very powerful too. It doesn't, it's I've had discussions with people about different process selections, for assembling a product. And it's like, well, we still use aluminum rivets, yeah. The Spirit of St. Louis had aluminum rivets, and so does the latest airplane coming off the line. Just because it's old and fairly simple doesn't mean that it's not effective.
All right.
So.
Yeah. And any thoughts about any leadership issues that folks should be thinking about during a lean implementation?
Again, it's driving an inclusive culture, open communication, keeping everyone tied in, and valuing people's input.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one for me. I will never forget when Greg Peters, whom we both know very well, I was a facilitator for a very specific event that I was like, how in the world did I get on this event? But okay. And I was typing the walls because that's what I thought I needed to do. And I will never forget Greg Peters coming up behind me and saying, I need your brain. I can hire somebody to type the walls. I need your brain. And that to me, I was like, wow, he actually wants my input. This is, the president of the company at the time. He wants my input. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, what a great, example of a leader, recognizing the one, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And, these, leave your badge at the door when you're going into a lean event.
Yeah.
Because that, sometimes it depends on the people that are in the room and the personalities, but as long as the senior leadership is, open and deals with people reasonably, doesn't, bite people's heads off if they offer an opinion they don't like or whatever, then you'll get results.
Yeah, it's so true. It makes me think of, in terms of facilitators too, if anyone, watching is in the process of picking a sensei for their organization, you mentioned before, make sure that, their behavior is right for the industry, because you may need a sensei that's a little more direct in one industry versus another. So make sure that that's true. But also, regardless of their personality and directness, they need to be inclusive. And that's not from a preference kind of thing. They need to be inclusive in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very true.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Duffy. I really appreciate you spending the time with me, and our watchers and listeners today, giving them some great advice from a leadership perspective. Thank you very much for doing this.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll invite you back as well if you're up for it.
All right.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.